My name is Emma, and I've lived in this town my whole life. It's a quiet place where everyone knows each other, where kindness still matters, at least I thought it did. That belief was shaken one cold afternoon when I stopped by a small grocery store near Main Street. I just needed a few things, nothing urgent, but what I saw at the checkout line made my stomach turn. An elderly man stood in front of me, his hands trembling slightly as he counted out a few crumpled bills and coins. His coat was worn out, patches sewn over old fabric, and his boots looked like they had seen better days. He had a gentle, tired look, but there was something strong in his eyes, something that told a story of hardships, of battles fought, both in life and maybe even in war. I recognized him. His name was Mr. Harris. I had seen him around town before, usually sitting on a park bench feeding the birds. People said he was a war veteran, though he never talked about it much. The young cashier, a boy barely in his 20s, sighed loudly. His name tag read Josh. He rolled his eyes as Mr. Harris carefully laid down his money for a loaf of bread, some milk, and a can of soup. "This isn't enough," Josh said, tapping the register screen. "You're short by $2. Mr. Harris frowned, his face flushing with embarrassment. "Oh, I must have miscounted." He patted his pockets, searching for spare change. Josh crossed his arms. "Well, do you have it or not?" "I don't have all day." I could feel my blood boiling. The way he spoke to Mr. Harris was cruel, impatient, like the old man was wasting his precious time. "I can put something back," Mr. Harris mumbled, reaching for the can of soup. Josh let out a short laugh. "Maybe you should have thought about what you could afford before coming to the register." The words hit like a slap. I saw Mr. Harris's hands pause over the can, his jaw tightening. The humiliation on his face was painful to watch. That was it. I couldn't stay quiet. "Excuse me," I said sharply, stepping forward. "That's no way to talk to someone." Josh scoffed and glanced at me, clearly unimpressed. "Mind your business, lady." But he had no idea that this was my business now. And soon, the whole town would hear about what happened here. Because what happened next, no one saw it coming. Mr. Harris's face was tight with embarrassment, and for a second, I thought he would just walk away. But I couldn't let that happen. I reached into my purse and pulled out a $5 bill. "Here," I said, placing it on the counter. "That should cover it." Josh smirked. "Oh, how generous," he muttered, but he still grabbed the money and rang up the purchase. Mr. Harris turned to me, his eyes glassy. "You didn't have to do that, miss," he said softly. I smiled at him. "It's nothing, really." Josh bagged the items carelessly and slid them toward Mr. Harris without another word. He didn't even say thank you. Instead, as Mr. Harris picked up the bag with his frail hands, Josh shook his head and muttered, "Shouldn't old people like you have savings? Or, I don't know, a family to take care of you?" The words sliced through the air like a knife. The people in line behind me shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to hear. I clenched my fists. "You have no idea who this man is, do you?" I said, my voice shaking with anger. Josh rolled his eyes. Yeah. He's old. What's your point?" I turned to the people in line. "Does anyone here know Mr. Harris's story?" A woman behind me spoke up. "I do. He served in the military for years. He lost his wife young and raised his only son alone. His son was killed in action overseas." Her voice wavered. "He gave everything for this country, and this is how we treat him?" Murmurs spread through the store. Some people looked down, ashamed they hadn't stepped in sooner. Others glared at Josh, their expressions hard. Josh, however, just scoffed. "So what? Does it mean he gets free groceries?" That was the last straw. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of him. "People should know how you treat veterans. I think the town would be very interested." His smirk finally disappeared. "You can't just—" "Oh, I can," I interrupted, "and I will." People around me nodded, some taking out their own phones. Josh's face paled, but before he could say anything else, a voice from behind the counter spoke up. "What's going on here?" It was the store manager. And the moment he saw the look on my face and the furious expressions of the customers, he knew something was very, very wrong. The store manager, a middle-aged man named Mr. Reynolds, stepped forward with a frown. He had the tired look of someone who had seen too many problems in one day, but the tension in the room told him this was different. "What's going on here?" he asked again, his eyes darting between me, Mr. Harris, and Josh. Before I could speak, Josh scoffed and crossed his arms. "Nothing. Just a bunch of people overreacting because some old guy didn't have enough money to pay. A stunned silence filled the air. Mr. Reynolds' face darkened. "Excuse me?" Josh shrugged. "I'm just saying, why should he get special treatment? He's just another customer. If he can't afford..." "Enough." Mr. Reynolds' voice was cold. "Step into my office, now." Josh's cocky expression faltered. "Wait, what? I didn't do anything wrong." Mr. Reynolds didn't argue. He just pointed toward the back of the store. "Office. Now." The tension in the room eased slightly as Josh stomped away, muttering under his breath. The manager let out a slow breath before turning to Mr. Harris. "I'm so sorry about that," he said sincerely. "That was unacceptable. Your groceries are on the house today, and every time you shop here from now on." Mr. Harris blinked, clearly taken aback. "Oh, no, I couldn't possibly accept." "It's not up for debate," Mr. Reynolds said firmly. "You've given enough for this country. This is the least we can do." A small smile formed on Mr. Harris's face, though his eyes were still filled with emotion. "Thank you," he murmured. A few people in line clapped softly. Others nodded in approval. The town might have stayed silent at first, but they weren't anymore. As Mr. Harris turned to leave, I walked beside him. "Would you like a ride home?" I asked gently. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "That would be kind of you." As we stepped outside, I could feel the shift in the air. The people of this town weren't going to forget what happened today. But little did I know, this was only the beginning. Because by the next morning, the entire town would be talking about it, and the consequences for Josh would be bigger than anyone expected. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing non-stop. At first, I thought it was just another news update or a spam call. But when I glanced at the screen, my heart skipped a beat. Messages. Dozens of them. People from town were texting me, sharing posts, tagging me in comments. Someone had uploaded the video of what happened at the grocery store. It had spread like wildfire overnight. I quickly opened the town's Facebook group, and there it was, a post with thousands of views and hundreds of comments. The caption read, "A war hero humiliated at our local grocery store. Is this how we treat our veterans?" Below it was the video of Josh mocking Mr. Harris, my confrontation, and the moment the manager stepped in. The comment section was furious. "This is disgusting. I won't be shopping there again unless something changes. How could someone be so heartless? That young man needs to be fired immediately. Does anyone know Mr. Harris personally? I'd like to help." I scrolled further and gasped. Local businesses were stepping in. The diner on Main Street wrote, "Mr. Harris, if you see this, breakfast is on us, every day, no charge." The pharmacy commented, "Any medication or medical supplies he needs, covered." And then the most shocking post of all. It was from the grocery store itself. "We do not condone the behavior of our employee. Effective immediately, Josh has been terminated. We sincerely apologize to Mr. Harris and will ensure this never happens again." I sat there in disbelief. He had been fired. I wasn't sure how to feel about it. Yes, he deserved consequences, but part of me wondered if he had ever been taught kindness in the first place. But then, a private message popped up. It was from Josh, and what he had to say was something I never expected. I stared at the message from Josh for a moment, unsure what to make of it. He had been so rude, so dismissive just yesterday, and now here he was, reaching out to me. I hesitated, but curiosity got the best of me. I opened it. "Emma, I know you probably hate me right now. I deserve that. I was out of line. My whole life I've acted like nothing really matters, like everyone is just a number or a transaction. But what happened yesterday, it made me think. And it made me ashamed. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know I'm sorry for how I treated Mr. Harris, for treating all of you like that. I don't want to be that person anymore." I read it again, slowly. The words felt different from the cocky, careless attitude he had yesterday. He was genuinely sorry. I took a deep breath. Should I respond? Should I tell him what everyone else was thinking? That he deserved to be fired and that his actions had consequences? Instead, I just typed, "We all make mistakes, Josh. It's what we do after that matters. I hope you find a better way forward." I set my phone down, unsure of what to expect next. Later that afternoon, I ran into Mr. Harris again. He was sitting on the same park bench, feeding the birds like always. His face was peaceful, but I could tell something had shifted in him too. "Emma," he said with a gentle smile when he saw me. I wanted to thank you again for what you did. I never expected something like that." I sat beside him, feeling the weight of the moment. "It was the least I could do, Mr. Harris. You've done so much for this country and for this town. The least we could do is show you the respect you deserve." His eyes softened. "Sometimes people forget. It's not just the big acts that matter. It's the little things. The kindness, the care. What you did, that's the kind of thing we need more of." I nodded, thinking about the way the town had rallied behind him. It was amazing, really, how people came together when one person stood up. "I hope that young man Josh learns that too," Mr. Harris continued. "It's never too late to change. I hope he gets the chance to." As he spoke, I realized something. This story wasn't just about an angry young cashier or a veteran who had been mistreated. It was about second chances, about how people can change, how communities can heal, and how the power of kindness can be greater than we sometimes believe. And maybe, just maybe, Josh had the chance to do the right thing now. But that wasn't the end of the story. The town had just begun to heal. And in the days that followed, even more surprises were waiting for all of us. A week passed, and the dust from that unforgettable day began to settle. People were still talking about it, of course. Mr. Harris had become something of a local hero, his story spreading beyond our town. The kindness that flowed from our community was heartwarming. People truly cared. But I hadn't expected what happened next. One afternoon, I was walking downtown when I spotted Josh. He was sitting on the steps of the old library, looking down at the ground, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. He looked different. Gone was the cocky attitude, the arrogance. There was a vulnerability in his posture, something I hadn't seen before. I hesitated. Should I talk to him? I didn't know if he wanted to see me after everything that had happened. But something inside me told me I should. So I took a deep breath and walked over. "Josh," I said softly. He looked up, his face pale. "Emma." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about Mr. Harris, about how I treated him. I don't even know why I acted that way." He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes filled with regret. "I guess I've always been taught that being tough was the only way to get by, but yesterday I realized just how wrong that was." I sat down beside him, waiting for him to continue. "I don't expect anyone to forgive me. I know I messed up, but I don't want to just leave things like this. I've been going to the VFW hall to meet some of the veterans, to hear their stories. I didn't even know what Mr. Harris had been through. How could I? I've lived such a sheltered life." He paused, as though weighing his words. "I want to make things right. I don't know how yet, but I will." His words were raw, sincere, and it was hard not to feel for him. For the first time, I saw someone who wasn't just apologizing for the sake of it. He was truly reflecting, truly changing. "I'm proud of you, Josh," I said quietly. "This is the first step. It's never too late to be better." He nodded slowly, the weight of everything on his shoulders. "I'm going to talk to Mr. Harris. I owe him an apology, one I should have given a long time ago." It was hard to believe how much had changed in just a week. The anger, the shame, the frustration, it was all slowly melting away, replaced with a sense of hope. Josh didn't just need to apologize, he needed to rebuild, and I believed he could. A few days later, I ran into Mr. Harris again in the park. He was sitting on his bench, of course, feeding the birds. But this time, there was something new in the air, a sense of anticipation. I didn't even have to ask. I could see the small, knowing smile on his face when I sat down next to him. "He came," Mr. Harris said softly. "Josh, he came to see me." I blinked, surprised. "Really?" He nodded, his eyes distant, as though he was remembering the conversation. "He apologized, and he meant it. You know, Emma, I think that young man is learning. It's a slow process, but I think he's on the right track." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I'm glad to hear that. We all need second chances," Mr. Harris said thoughtfully. "No one's perfect, but it's what we do after we mess up that defines us." As we sat there together, I couldn't help but feel that the town had learned something too. Something beyond kindness and redemption. It was about understanding, about giving people the chance to rise above their mistakes. Josh wasn't the villain anymore. He was a person trying to grow. And Mr. Harris, despite everything he'd endured, had become a symbol of forgiveness. The town would never be the same, and maybe that was for the better. But there was still one more surprise waiting for me. And it came in the form of a letter that arrived a few weeks later, from Josh. It was an ordinary Tuesday when the letter arrived. I had just finished a long shift at the local library and was about to sit down for a cup of tea when I noticed the envelope. It was simple, plain, even. But it was addressed to me, and the return address was familiar. Josh. I hesitated, unsure whether to open it. What could he possibly have to say now? I had seen him change, seen him take the first steps, but this letter felt different. Finally I opened it. Dear Emma. It began. I've been thinking about the way things ended between us. I know the damage I caused isn't easily fixed, and I can't change what happened, but I want to try. I'm starting over. Really starting over. I've been working at the local mechanic's shop, learning how to fix cars, learning how to do things the right way, and I've also been spending a lot of time at the VFW hall, helping out where I can. Mr. Harris was right. He taught me something that day. We all make mistakes, but we have the power to make them right. I know it's going to take time, but I wanted to let you know. Thank you for being part of that change. You didn't have to help me, but you did, and that means more than I can say. I sat there for a long moment, reading and rereading the letter. There was something about the way he wrote it, so raw, so honest. I could feel the sincerity in his words, and I realized this wasn't just an apology, it was a commitment to do better. I smiled softly, thinking about how far Josh had come in such a short time. Maybe I had been skeptical at first, but now, I truly believed he was on a new path. Later that week, the town had another surprise. Mr. Harris, who had been so quiet about his life, had decided to take action himself. With the help of the community, he opened a small veterans support center right in the heart of the town. It wasn't much at first, just a few tables, some chairs, and a lot of heart. But it became a place where veterans could come together, share their stories, and find support. And Josh, he volunteered there. I still remember the first time I saw him there, standing alongside Mr. Harris. It was at the grand opening of the center, and Josh looked different. He wasn't the cocky cashier anymore. He was a young man trying to make a difference. He was learning. When I approached him that day, he looked up, his face filled with a mix of nervousness and hope. Hey Emma, he said softly. I just wanted to say thank you for everything. I smiled. You don't have to thank me, Josh. You did this. He looked around at the veterans who were chatting, laughing, and supporting each other. I didn't do it alone. Mr. Harris, the community, you, everyone helped me see that it's never too late to change. I nodded. We all have a role to play. And that was the truth. The town had come together in ways I never thought possible. What started as a moment of cruelty had turned into a movement of kindness and redemption. Josh wasn't just another person who messed up and went unnoticed. He was the proof that change was possible, even when it seemed impossible. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful, not just for Josh, but for all of us, because the town had shown me something I would never forget, the power of second chances. And that's how a simple act of kindness in the face of cruelty turned into something that changed not just one person, but an entire community. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story and found it meaningful. If you did, please like, comment, and share to help spread the word. It really means a lot. And if you're not subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new content. Your support makes all the difference and helps me create more stories for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below. See you in the next one.